in the not-too-distant future, following the rapid succession of World Wars III and IV, plus the hidden horrors of secret World War II. There's not much left. All that remains is a place where folks get together to read and discuss comic books. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they argue, but they always record and upload their transmissions. You've found one of those transmissions today. Welcome to the last comic shop.
People often ask me how the world ended, whether it was with a bang or with a whimper. And all I can say is, first they came for the drive-ins, and nobody said anything.
Next, they took the arcades, and still, folks stayed silent.
Then it was the video rental establishments, the record shops, and the toy stores. And still, they said nothing. By the time they got to the local comic book shops, there were no nerds left to say anything.
Except for us! We're the last comic shop, raging against the dying of the light, sending our broadcasts back into the days of futures past, in hopes that our comic book reviews might alter this cold, gray reality in which comic shops are nothing but a long forgotten memory.
So heed our words and go to your local comic shop. Pick up either the book we'll be reviewing today or any number of countless comic book treasures before it's too late. And I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson, and welcome back to another week of The Last Comic Shop. Thank you for tuning in to our broadcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Smith. So, Chad,
that's me.
If you were going to have any item from any comic book, which item would you have?
This is a hard question, because there's so many things that just don't work in my everyday life. Like, I wouldn't want an ultimate nullifier because they just nullify stuff. Accidentally, that'd be bad. I wouldn't want spider webs because everything gets sticky for an hour and people ask too many questions. So I'm gonna go with a Green Lantern ring where I can make whatever goofy stuff I want, but it just has to be green.
Wow! You know what? I actually thought you were gonna go for that Rocketeer jacket because you've always wanted one of those Rocketeer jackets.
And guess what, buddy? I can make one. It just has to be green.
I wonder if that's how Guy Gardner got his start. Anyways, we've also got my other co-host, J.A. Scott. J.A., if you were to have any item from any comic book series, what item would you have?
That one's an easy for me. I'd have to go with the Silver Surfer surfboard.
You mean to me? My board! To me!
I do not call it that. I do not recognize that series as part of the Silver Surfer canon.
Oh! Wow. All those Mike Aldred fans. I love that series. What about the issue in which everything was like forwards and backwards and it was like a Mobius strip? That was the best!
One thing Dan Slott did that I liked.
And also on today's podcast, we've also got the wonderful and talented Lindsay Fahey. Lindsay, if you were to have one item from any comic book series, what would you have?
So I feel like you guys all know more about comic books than I do. So I am going to choose a Rocket Raccoon because I think he's like the type of chaos that I would really enjoy and also crafty enough to get us out of any real trouble. He seems like he'd be fun.
Very nice. Would it come with a side of Groot, or are you...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he seems like a clever pet, for sure.
You just got her own forest pals.
I am a Disney princess.
Nice.
And as the host with the most, if I was going to have any sort of comic book related item, it would have to be the Fortress of Solitude, because after dealing with some of these yokels every single week, sometimes I just need some quiet time. Just some place where I can go and have my little city of Candor stuck in a big...
Plug in your crystals.
Right. I've always thought that the Fortress of Solitude has been a much better base than even the Batcave. Like, if I was going to go to either one of those, Fortress of Solitude, it's just cleaner, crisp, nice. It's probably smells of peppermint, refreshing, like a York peppermint patty of superhero base.
That sounds like a great place to send your kids in timeout.
Yes!
Kids in the Fortress of Solitude? It's not the Fortress of, hey, kids, run around here.
No, it is. I like that idea. Essentially, the Fortress of Solitude is the superhero equivalent of a timeout chair. There's nothing to do there.
Oh, come on. You got those big cellophane capes. It's wonderful. Are you saying that you would rather have a Batcave, J.A.?
Yeah.
Yes. And why? Because of the giant penny?
You didn't even mention the dinosaur.
Or that sweet computer?
Those are all just bonuses to the giant penny.
In any case, we've got more Last Comic Shop coming up right after these messages. We're going to be reviewing a Marvel comic this week. It is the first 6 issue of Donny Cotes' Thor run. So stay tuned for all of that.
It was the three-legged dog of comics.
It was bad.
These two gentlemen met in jail, and then when they got out, they started publishing.
It should have been mobsters instead of doing what they're doing in comics.
Management there was questionable at times.
Some of it has to do with people who go to jail.
We are sinners. We have corrupted the youth. Stuff that should never have been sold to kids. And then there was Charlton. I couldn't quite tell what they were doing.
Charlton was just a hodgepodge of weird titles.
What is this? Who am I dealing with?
John threw nickels around like they were manhole covers.
CATAP. They were cheap.
Hell yes, they're cheap. They were special kind of special is what they were.
Printing was horrible.
You could smell them beginning to decay even as they were rolling off the press.
At one point, they actually did have to move the comics operation into a bowling alley.
It's something out of a sitcom.
We want to publish comic books in the worst way, and they did.
It's been called the street-fighting cousin of Marvel and DC. Maybe you've heard of them. Probably not. But you do know the industry legends that called it home. This is Charlton Comics. Follow at charltonmovie.com.
Oh, it's going to suck.
And we are back with more of The Last Comic Shop. And on this week's show, we're going to be reviewing a terrific series that was only released not too long ago. It is Donny Cotes' run on Thor, the first 6 issues. Chad, has this been collected yet?
Yes. So the first trade has already been out for quite some time. And it keeps coming out on a monthly basis. This is Donny Cotes is the writer, Nic Kline is the artist. You have Matt Wilson on letters. And basically the story picks up right after Jason Aaron's epic run on Thor, The War of the Realms, where Jason Aaron really took his time and put his stamp on the character. He cut off his arm, Thor lost an eye, Thor became king of Asgard, taking over for Odin. And all these things, all these big changes happen. And then Donny Cotes got the book and he shows Thor, and being king, it's not something he would have chosen necessarily, but it's weighing on him. He starts off and he's trying to send messages across all the realms. And, it leads to a fun little moment where his hammer Mjolnir comes crashing down to Earth. And Tony Stark's like, oh, cool. And then he writes on it with a Sharpie.
But yeah, absolutely. So why don't you jump into that 10-cent synopsis right now there, Chad? What happens after that?
Okay, so first issue is Thor dealing with the aftermath of the War of the Realms, basically. And then at the end of the issue, Galactus comes. There is a great threat called the Black Winter that is approaching. And so Galactus' first step is to go to Thor and then undo all the repercussions of Jason Aaron's entire run.
I know, right?
Yeah, he turns Thor into his new Herald. Silver Surfer had previously mapped out these planets that would give Galactus this immense power that might help him to battle the Black Winter. Thor becomes the herald that leads Galactus across the journey to these various planets to get the energy that he needs to combat this great threat, this Black Death. That's basically the long and short of it.
Well, I mean, do we want to spoil the series from the start that there's a massive thing that happens in issue 6?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, one of the biggest things that happens in this series is Galactus dies. again, because it's not the first time that he's actually died in Marvel comic book continuity. So, but yeah, Donny Cates decides that Thor is going to kill old Galactus in the end.
But I viewed that as a comic book death. He's coming back.
Yeah. That's why it's kind of a minor spoiler, because honestly, you can't keep a good villain like Galactus down for very long. But as the person that doesn't read a lot of comic books, as you might have heard on previous shows, we've got Lindsay Fahey as kind of our comic book rookie, as it were. And so she's had to jump in to this pretty intense mythology of Marvel comics, and especially Thor. And I want to get her initial thoughts first as to what she thought of this book, and if she had any questions for the rest of us.
Yeah. So the big question that I had was actually just answered by Chad. The hardest thing for me was the continuity and the time frame, because I have seen most, if not all, of the Marvel movies, and that's really where my reference point is. And it starts off with the interaction with Tony Stark, and there's certain physical characteristics of the drawing of Thor that then change. So it's very confusing for me. So thank you, Chad, for enlightening me as to what exactly happened when, because now it all makes sense.
When we first picked this one, we're like, oh, Lindsay's going to be on the show. I was thinking to myself, like, well, Thor can be pretty tough and pretty convoluted, but knowing the background, so you're familiar with things like the Bifrost, and when Sif is there in the Heimdall role, like, having seen those movies, that gives a lot of extra context. And basically, at the end of the first issue, Cates wipes out any stuff that comes before and is like, this is a brand new hullabaloo. And that would ease you in a little bit.
It's a massive reset button for sure.
So time travel in movies is something that always kind of freaks me out. I don't quite get it. And it was kind of like that. And I really didn't understand what was going on, but I just sort of powered through it, thinking that it would wrap itself up. And then it did in a most confusing manner again until just now.
Okay. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you're a comic book noob like I am, you just need a Chad Smith in your life.
There you go. That's actually one of the reasons why we're here.
That's true.
People to figure some of this stuff out and make it a little bit more accessible.
So I wanted to kick it over to J.A. next, because, again, one of the major reasons we also picked this book is because it features a lot of characters that historically my cousin J.A. has liked. Galactus, Silver Surfer shows up, and as somebody that recently read another one of Donny Cates' books in Silver Surfer Black, I was wondering what you thought of this particular book and how it compared to Silver Surfer Black.
So I liked the book. I don't think it was as good as Silver Surfer Black, and that might just come down to the story they were telling, or even the art. This art was very different than Silver Surfer Black.
Very, very hyper-sci, very trippy.
Surfer. That was very trippy, cartoony art. This art had a very painterly quality to it that it really worked for big panels. Didn't work so much in a traditional 6-panel layout, 8-panel layout type thing. But if he was doing single panel pages or 2-panel pages, this painterly quality of the art I really loved. I had some issues with the overall storyline. I thought it's something that could have been condensed into 2 traditional issues. It seemed to have a bit of padding sometimes, and each issue was just too short, and that might just be modern comic books in general. 6 issues to tell a story that if you were in the 90s would have been 2 issues. But in the 90s probably would have been like 2 issues and then an annual and then a major crossover event.
Yes. Yeah. You don't get into the true traditional 2 issues unless you're going back to the 70s. But I agree that there was quite a lot of padding in issues 3 and 4 of this. This whole notion of fighting with Beta Ray Bill, that really didn't have to happen. It was just pretty much he came down. He's like, Thor, you're being a jerk. And he's like, shut up, Beta Ray Bill, and punched him in the face. And then Sif's like, you're being a jerk. I was like, this has nothing to do with anything.
Can I hit the pause button on you here? Just because I want to defend Donny Cates. Okay. Andy in particular knows this, and I think Jay and I have discussed it before. When I first read Silver Surfer Black, I wasn't sure if it was good or not. Was this good? I genuinely couldn't tell. But I think since then, I've had a revelation about Donny Cotes. And what I've decided is that Donny Cotes, even though he's a writer and not an artist, he has inherited the soap opera elements and the bombast of the image creators of the 90s, the Rob Liefelds, the Todd McFarlanes. And instead of pouches, like Rob Liefeld thought pouches were cool, Donny Cotes thinks that symbiotes are cool. And like black ooze. And let's be honest, like when the Silver Surfer's all covered with like ooze and stuff, that is awesome. When the Black Winter comes and you see like Black Thor, like that's awesome. And I've often given him the backhanded compliment of like, all right, he has these really dumb ideas that somehow he makes work. Like he had the idea for the Cosmic Ghost Rider, which was the Punisher that had a little baby Thanos, and like. But I think when it comes to things like the Beta Ray Bill issue and the Sif issue, what he's doing, he's playing that soap opera long con, similar to what they used to do back in the day with the X-Men, where like somebody would pop in and like. I've read the further issues of this series, and the interactions between Thor and Beta Ray Bill, they come up later. Like, that's its very next arc. And so he's planting seeds, and J.A. can attest to this. There are seeds in here that were planted in Silver Surfer Black. And there are things planted here that, like, go back to when Donny Cotes was writing Thanos and that series. And so I think this guy's playing the long con.
And I will say, to that point, some of my favorite parts of this book were those interactions with Sif and Loki picking up the hammer, and the issues I had were more like I felt that Thor's power set just became too big.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be able to decide when he wants to have the power cosmic or not. You know, the whole idea that he's destroying Galactus, essentially, I had issues with that because Thor, you know, was always strong and powerful, but to make him godlike, it didn't quite work for me, which is why I like those times like where he threw the hammer at Sif and she makes it disappear using the Bifrost. Or like Beta Ray Bill held on to Mjolnir and Thor couldn't get it to come back because he's becoming unworthy. That bit of the story I found really interesting because it was character development. My biggest issue is that he became so powerful. This whole, I'm super bad and I can take everything I want from you, Galactus, and that I felt it was a bit Deus Ex Machina.
See, I've got to disagree on that, and it's simply because it used to be back in the day where J.A. and I would always talk about people's power levels. Like, he was always one of these guys who was just like, oh, well, you know, Thor could never stand up to Galactus because he's just a god. Versus like Galactus, who is like this force of the universe or whatever. Thor's still a god. Like, he's still one of the most powerful superheroes in the Marvel universe. Like, sincerely, it was nice to see him actually flex his muscles and be able to do some things that you would expect from somebody that's a freaking god.
And now he's not only Thor, he's Thor plus Odin plus...
Yeah, he's got the Odin Force. Like, he's been
on stacks on stacks.
Right, and I totally believed the notion that like Thor was playing Galactus the whole time. Like, Galactus thought that he was using Thor as a pawn to get him these planets or whatever, but no. I love the fact that at the end Thor turns the tables and says, "No, Galactus, I was playing you. Like, I'm the one pulling the strings right now," and it's because Thor legitimately has righteous justice on his side. Like, he is legitimately a good character. Versus Galactus, which, I'll be honest, like, Galactus is one of the biggest conundrums that I've had with the Marvel Universe. Because some people consider him a bad guy, but at other times he's portrayed as, you know, being beyond traditional morality, good and evil, you know, and even sometimes being viewed somewhat benevolently, like some sort of cosmic garbage man, like freeing up the universe of unnecessary waste. Like, if you go back to like the trial of Reed Richards, Eternity's like, yep, he's like my garbage man. He just destroys planets to bring people together and stuff. But I never bought it. Like, he still kills people on a vast cosmic scale. And so to see him get his comeuppance in this book, it was really rewarding for me. Like, I was like, good, put that guy down. It's fine.
So, Lindsay, what did you think as somebody who's kind of a stranger in a strange land with all the scope of all this stuff?
I think what I said before, just like sort of powering through it. I know that there's multiple universes. I know, like with DC and with Marvel, that there's so many different layers. And depending on who's writing, they take it different ways. They backtrack and they do this again. So for me, it was interesting to read, but I really had no idea what was going on.
Did you catch when Donny Cotes destroyed the DC universe in issue 2?
Yes, I did. I do remember that one.
Like,
Yeah.
this is the type of guy where if he gets an idea in his head, he's like, that's a cool idea. He's going to do it. He doesn't care, oh, Galactus is being used in this other book this way. Who cares? He's going to have Thor blow him up.
Also, I don't really know many of the characters that he introduced. You guys are intimately familiar with Galactus. I don't know who that is. That's just like a dude, and he's like f***ing huge. Oh, sorry.
Think it was cool?
I mean, I thought it was interesting, and again, it held my interest, and it held me to the end, and then I got really confused, and I was like, wait a minute.
So speaking of some of the cool parts of this, I know that J.A. was sharing some of those double-page spreads. He showed one of them of Galactus kind of being dwarfed by the Black Winter, and he said, this is awesome. J.A., were there any other panels or pages that, as an art freak, as somebody that has loved good comic book art over the years, that you just thought, wow, that captured my imagination?
Yes, and this is more because I'm such a fanboy. The first big panel in issue 6, where the doors are swinging open to Asgard, and the Black Silver Surfer is flying in on his board, and that's a full page. It looks just ready to be made into a poster.
And that's one of those things. I'm really glad that Silver Surfer showed up in this series. A lot of the concepts that Donny Cotes plays with in this book have been around for quite some time. Like, Thor and Galactus have been kind of intertwined as characters as far back as, I think, Thor 160, or actually the second real big storyline that Galactus is in. Galactus is going to eat Ego, the living planet. For those people that have watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, that's Kurt Russell's character in that particular movie. And basically, Thor comes to Ego's rescue. A couple issues later, you get the origin of Galactus that appears in a Thor book. So between that and Silver Surfer 4, in which Thor and Silver Surfer first fight, I thought there were a lot of callbacks in this particular book. And one of the biggest ones I'll bring up is actually the one that I'm going to pitch out during our recommendations as a similar book to this, which is Galactus the Devourer, which I'll get to a little bit later on. If you like this Donny Cotes run, you should go back and read Louise Simonson's Galactus the Devourer, because it's pretty much the same story. And again, I'm not sure whether I like Donny Cotes as a writer, but like, I at least like some of these toys he's bringing out and saying, yeah, these toys have always kind of existed together. Like, they're like peanut butter and chocolate. They taste good. Putting Thor and Galactus in the same book and putting Silver Surfer there, these are the cosmic guys at Marvel. They should exist together.
So I was going to say, my favorite moments of this story they were all hubris-based. They were all people being posturing dicks. And so whether it was Thor and Beta Ray Bill, and like Beta Ray Bill's, he's like, brother, please don't make me go through you. And Thor's like, I'm sorry, but through is the only way. And then he's just like taunting him. He's like, listen, we were an even match when it was just Thor, but now I'm Thor plus Odin plus Galactus. And he's like, you're nothing. He's like, this will not be that. And he's just such a dick. And then later on, Galactus has a moment with Thor. It harkens back to the Avengers, where it's like, Ultron, we want to have words with thee. I forget what the exact quote is. But yeah. Galactus calls back to that. And so if you're a longtime fan, like, all these great moments of all this over-the-top posturing and machismo, and like, it's just so fun to watch these guys be dicks to each other. And with Thor in particular, he's the type of character where his stories really do repeat over time. Like, if you've read, one great Thor run Then you go back and read the others, like, oh, that's kind of similar to this. And I don't think Cates is doing anything like supremely different, but he's having so much fun with the different elements that I think it feels fresh. And that's often a challenge for somebody like Thor, I think.
One of my favorite moments was actually when he goes inside the Black Winter and he starts seeing all of his major foes, and there weren't many there. They were like pulling out like random jabronis, like Doctor Doom. That's a Thor villain. I'm like, no, that's not. They had like 3 or 4 good ones. They had like Loki, and they had a Magog, and
Suture,
so they had a couple good ones. But then they just threw in some, like Apocalypse was there. I'm just like, really? Like that's who you're bringing out as a Rogues Gallery member of
Apocalypse and Juggernaut.
I was just like, all right, well, whatever. But I still gave it a break, and that's why, I don't know, like, that's why I'm kind of torn on this particular book, because I'm like, there were some moments I was like, and then there was other moments like yeah, you throw that hammer through Galactus's chest.
The planets themselves, there's the one with the bears, the precognitive bears.
They knew that they were going, so they were packed and ready. I like a good. I like some
baskets.
preparation. They probably had snacks too. Maybe I want those bears along with my Rocket Raccoon.
So, I mean, I think the final thing I want to ask my cousin J.A., because he's been a long-time fan of basically Silver Surfer and the cosmic side. Even though this is kind of a comic book death, did it piss you off that they killed Galactus, or were you just like, it's a part of the story?
No, it didn't. It didn't make me angry. I thought it was just a part of the story. I think he'll come back in some form. Galactus, I view him as this sort of, elemental part of the Marvel universe. He exists, outside normal morality type things. Him and Eternity and Living Tribunal, all these giant cosmic being type things. Thanos, maybe even, though I think what makes Thanos much more interesting is that he's trying to become one of these things and he's not. He's a normal, person who's trying to bring himself up, which is what always this quest for the Infinity Stones and everything is. So it didn't make me angry because I always assume that Galactus will come back and it's part of the story. But I thought they just didn't handle it well enough. Thor took on all that extra power much too easily. He had trouble fighting Beta Ray Bill, but at the same time, he dispatched Galactus in 4 panels. So that I felt was kind of playing a bit fast and loose and
Right. Another quick question, because you brought it up while you were talking. What did you think of when Thor has his vision of the future, and it turns out that Thanos, as we all might have thought, ends up being the real big bad behind all of this, with his Mjolnir encrusted with infinity gems, covered by the Marvel zombies in the background. And first off, is anybody sick of Thanos being the big bad? Or do we have to have Thanos the big bad because we have the MCU movies?
I don't know if we have to have Thanos as the big bad. I think for cosmic stories, he tends to be the big bad because he's a known entity, and you can't just create sort of these large crossover epic cosmic events and introduce somebody new, because it doesn't work as well. It doesn't have as much pathos, and he brings this, level of backstory and level of...
To step on J.A.'s point, Thanos is where the money is. People know Thanos. They're going to pay money to see Thanos get his comeuppance. So you put Thanos in your story. People are tuning into that pay-per-view.
That's true. Lindsay knew who Thanos was from the final panels. So I
did, and I wonder if Thanos as a villain is more relatable, because the things that he postulates, or at least from the Marvel comic book series, the idea that we are overpopulated and that we're over-resourcing and that we're just not necessarily good and sustainable for our planet, that's a valid question. And so maybe it's the more relatability that makes him so effective as...
Way to go, Ebenezer Fahey, with the surplus population.
That's true. I mean, to be honest, that has only cropped up since the Marvel, the MCU movies. They actually did make Thanos much more of a hero of his own story. in those movies versus back in the day, he just wanted to have sex with death. That's pretty much what it came down to.
What would their baby look like?
I don't know. It depends on which side of Death's face you see. Sometimes it's the skull. Other times it's a fairly good-looking woman. So I don't understand, but
she would get the chin bumps.
She get the chin bumps.
Yeah.
The chin
in
boobs.
Infinity Gauntlet, he creates his consort, and she has the chin bumps.
So is that like incest? He created his own daughter in his image.
So I will say, I love that last panel with I want to read a book where somebody's slapping the Infinity Stones on Mjolnir. I think that is just cool.
And why would you have to hit anybody with it? What, is it effective as a weapon at that point? Like
it looks cool, but it's also it's a bedazzled Mjolnir.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the sad part is the tool becomes the decoration.
Right.
The bedazzle part that's the real power.
If you had sincerely a gold hammer like on your workbench, would you actually hammer any nails with it? You'd be like, no, this is my gold hammer. I don't do anything with it. It's gold. Like I just leave it there and like I wouldn't.
Amazing Spider-Man comics from the 90s taught me that gold is very malleable.
It's very soft.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll be right back with more Comic Shop with our grades, ratings, whatever you want to call it, right after these messages. So stay tuned for more Last Comic Shop right after this.
Have you checked out QuadMProductions.com lately? QuadMProductions.com is your direct access hookup to order the Enigma comic book series and download the Quad M Show podcast. Check the appearances page for upcoming events and contact us with any questions or comments. Don't be the only lonely soul who's missing out on all the fun. Visit us today at QuadMProductions.com. That's QuadMProductions.com.
All right, we're back with more of the Last Comic Shop, and it's now time for that part of the show where we tell you what we really think about this particular book that we reviewed this week, and we rate it. We give it some sort of numerical value in order to assess its worth as a thing. It's
the final evaluation.
That's right. We are going to say whether or not we think this was good or bad or in the middle. And so, as always with our particular show, we rate it 1 out of 4 somethings. And so this week, J.A., what are we doing the 1 out of 4 somethings?
1 out of 4 devoured planets.
Wow!
Well
very fitting,
sir.
That is very fitting. Because we are at the end of the world, and I'm sure that there have been some of those, plus something to nom on in your spare time. So we'll start off with J.A., hopefully a book near and dear to his heart. What are you going to give this book this week?
So I'm going to give it like between 2 and 3 devoured planets. I would say it's like two devoured planets and a lot of moons. I really liked it. I really enjoyed going back to the storyline that Donny Cotes started out with I guess he started it in Guardians of the Galaxy. So I really liked revisiting this idea of the black entity that Donny Cotes went into with Silver Surfer Black. I liked the cosmic elements. I liked the interplay between Galactus and Thor. I thought it struggled at times. Thor jumped between being like godlike and being normal Thor with all his hang-ups, and that was one of the failings. I thought it didn't work as well. That being said, it could have been 2 longer issues instead of 5 or 6 smaller issues, but I think that's just modern comics for you versus back in the day. So I give it 2 big M-class planets and a lot of moons. Devoured.
Wow, M-class planets. All right, Lindsay, what is your grade or rating for this week?
I would give it a little bit less. I wouldn't give it the moons. So I would give it the 2 devoured planets, and I would not donate the bear's planet. I would let them stay alive. Because they seemed pretty cool and like they have snaps.
Well, they still live. They just went to Asgard.
Yeah, let them have their planet. I would let him devour 2 empty planets.
Yes. Don't take with the Jellystone National Park planet.
Right. I want to pet those bears. I would like to vacation there. I mean, the artwork was very cool. The storyline was, interesting enough. It kept my attention. But as someone who does not have the history and the knowledge of comic book history, it was just very confusing. So if I had wanted to find out more information, how many other books would I have to go read to understand it and to really appreciate it? That is quite a significant investment for me. So 2 empty, dead planets.
Real quickly, I know that I asked you the last time you were on the show when we did Cleveland, whether or not you would recommend Cleveland to non-comic book readers. Would you recommend this book to non-comic book readers?
I don't think I would recommend this one as a starter for Thor. I think it was too much, and especially with the saturation of Thor with the Marvel comic universe right now, everyone knows those stories, and that's what I went into, and then I was just confused for most of the time. So I think it would not be a great starter book.
All right, Chad?
All right, so I'm going to go the opposite route. I'm going to give this 4 out of 4 devoured planets. This is not a starter book. This is a book for people that have been around the block a couple of times, and I know there's a lot of people out there in a similar boat. Those people that were fans in the 90s and missed that bombast and that excitement. I genuinely think that Donny Cotes does a great job of capturing that stuff. And even when he does it with characters that I don't care about, like Venom or Carnage, I think he really has a stranglehold on the comics industry at this moment. Like, he's the torchbearer for those purposes. And so if you're somebody who, is a lapsed reader, or if you're somebody who's into the long ongoing soap opera elements of things, if you think Black Symbiote Ooze is cool and Black Clouds of Death and destroying Galactus and blowing up DC and all of that stuff, I can appreciate all of it. And so I had a lot of fun with this book, and we've talked a lot about Donny Cotes, and I don't think we've talked nearly enough about Nic Kline. J.A. and I were talking earlier about how it went so fast, but boy, were those double-page spreads beautiful. I think he's the perfect accessory to the crime of Donny Cotes in terms of bringing that excitement, and he's got that scratchy, edgy art style that was different than Tradd Moore's Silver Surfer Black. I just think it works. Now, if you're somebody that's just coming in, not so much. But if you're part of the old standby, I think this is it. My only complaint with it, though, and I will ding it in this sense, the big downside is Donny Cotes in the very first issue kind of undoes himself, because he has all these big bombastic moments and all these big things. But if in the very first moment you're like, no, here's a hard reset button, boop, that just tells you that later on, oh, he's going to hit a reset button, and there will be Galactus again, and there will be all this stuff, and there will be original costumes, and it's and nothing matters if everything can be undone in one fell swoop. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad, because after the War of the Realms, what are you going to do? They needed somebody to hit that reset button.
Yeah. By the way, this was Chad's pick for this week. So, of course, 4 out of 4 for a Chad pick. And so with my final rating, I went back and forth, really, because I am still not sure whether I like Donny Cotes' writing. And I have read a lot of Donny Cotes. I mean, ultimately, when I was reading this book, it reminded me a lot of his Image series, God Country, which was pretty much kind of like a Thor book. It was like an older guy that had Alzheimer's, that got a magic sword that fell from the heavens and had fighting gods on the Texas prairies or something. Crazy stuff. But I mean, you read that book and you're like, yeah, these are a lot of the same concepts that he would eventually use in some of the cosmic parts of the Marvel universe. So I could see the threads, being laid even there. And I like the fact that he kind of throws concepts that you're like, yeah, why can't Thor be Galactus's Herald? That's kind of a super cool concept. Team those guys up together. Who says you can't do that? And especially after this long but very good and epic Thor run that Jason Aaron had, through the female Thor, through Thor losing his arm and being unworthy, through the War of the Realms and all of that jazz. Like, it's nice to have somebody hit a reset button and say, nope, let's go in a different direction. Let's try something new. Let's try to get some people on board with the Thor book. And so kudos for him for having the balls to just kind of wipe out 10 years of previous continuity with a simple, yeah, he's got the power cosmic, he has an arm again, great, let's go with it. But at the same time, that's why sometimes I think it may be a 1. Because, to Chad's point, does any of this matter? Like, you get some cool moments in this. It's awesome. He throws a hammer through Galactus' chest, killing him. But if you're a longtime reader of comic books, Galactus has died before, and he will probably come back again. So, like, it doesn't matter. It's just kind of like a set piece. So, you know what? I'm going to give it 3 devoured planets, because I honestly look at this book, and I'm like, this is kind of like a what if. It's an Elseworlds. It happens in its own continuity now. Like, it's what if Thor was Galactus' Herald, except it was 6 issues instead of 1. And from that perspective, it was an awesome story, and I enjoyed it. And I did really love the art. It had that John Romita Jr. kind of look to it at times. Like, who did John Romita Jr. do a Thor run with? Was that Dan Jurgens?
Yes.
So it reminded me a lot of that Thor run. He had that same look to his, especially when he was all cosmically powered up. He looked like JR's Thor. And I was like, I like that series. That was cool. And so 3 devoured planets for just being like kind of like a what if. But if you're like a fan of Marvel continuity, I don't know. Maybe it's a 1. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not for the old guard. It is kind of disappointing because I can see Lindsay Fahey's points. I think they're all valid, but it is sad that it's so impenetrable.
But maybe that's good for new fans. I don't know. Now, if I recommend this book to anybody, I'm like, don't worry about anything that happened in Thor before. Just read it as it is. Just read it as it is, folks. And speaking of reading it as it is, here comes some recommendations. As we often do on this show, we always give you 3 recommendations as well as a cherry on top, which will come from Lindsay Fahey. We've got a similar book, a current book, and a book out of left field. So we're going to start off this week with our current book and J.A. So J.A., what's the current book for this week?
So current came out in 2019, so it's current-ish, but definitely relates also to what we have just read, and that would be the Silver Surfer Black. Donny Cotes writing with art by Trad Moore. And this is similar in that it's obviously the same writer and it's exploring the same concepts, this black entity taking over, eating the universe. But the art is completely different. It's this very trippy, cartoony art that I think really fits the writing well. I have it on my iPad, but the way to buy this book, if you really want it, is the Treasury edition, and that's portfolio size pages of it looks like it's something from the 60s. Some of these posters could have a Jimi Hendrix concert on them. Yeah, and they're not that expensive because they're paperbacks. I would buy 2 of them and X-Acto knife one just to hang around my room.
Yeah, because they do look like the side of some sort of van in the 70s. Like, Tradmore is just like, this was a book that they definitely needed to put out in Treasury, and I was so glad that they did, because, I don't know, it looks like something that you would pick up on the newsstand in the 70s.
And also, it's a return to better writing for the Silver Surfer, in my opinion. I was not a fan of the Dan Slott, Mike Allred 2014 run on the Silver Surfer. I thought they didn't get the Surfer. They didn't understand how to write for the Surfer. And this is much more of sort of, the similar stories that you saw in Volume 3, original Volume 1, Silver Surfer with Stan Lee's writing. It's just a much better story.
Wow. That's interesting to hear that, like, Dan Slott's Silver Surfer wasn't your Silver Surfer, just like Dan Slott's Spider-Man wasn't Chad's Spider-Man. Dan Slott seems to like to write a lot of people that aren't their character. characters. But it's okay. It's different anyways.
As long as they're good stories.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes.
I'm going to jump in here with our similar pick. I had actually a lot to pick from. I was going to say maybe Donny Cotes' God Country, as I mentioned. But honestly, I'm going to go with the comic book that I mentioned before, which was Galactus the Devourer. This came out in the late 90s. It was written by Louise Simonson with art by a awesome dream team of classic comic book artists in John Buscema on pencils with Bill Sienkiewicz on inks. And it really is an interesting story that actually has a lot to do with the book we did today. It's this crazy book where Silver Surfer is shacked up with Alicia Masters on Earth, and Galactus has gone crazy with hunger. And since the last time we saw Galactus, he pretty much has decided that, like, no, he's no longer maintaining any sort of cosmic balance, indiscriminately destroying random worlds. No, he's like a sad sack with an eating disorder, and he's evolved into full-on grazing of worlds that have to be inhabited by sentient beings that know that they're getting eaten. That's what he says. Like, he's like that's
I feel like this is like the foie gras of planet.
It's like, I want to look at that cow in the eye while I'm devouring it. Like that's seriously what this book's about. And honestly, it's really just a reason for Louise Simonson to make Galactus kind of a cosmic dick. And it's basically like Old Yeller. Silver Surfer decides he's got to put Galactus down. And so he teams up with the Shire and all these cosmic people. He basically kills Galactus, just like Thor did in this particular book. So if you liked Galactus dying, go read Galactus the Devourer, because it was done like 20 years before by Louise Simonson in a wonderful, wonderful book. So, Chad, what's your recommendation?
I have a real short story here. Well, I'm telling it, so it won't be a real short story. But it's probably never happened before. It'll never happen again in the history of the world. One day, the wife sent me out on a task. Near this task, there was a comic shop. And the day before, I've been flipping through my stacks, and I've talked before about how I like to go through the buck bins. And I noticed, I'm missing this one issue of a 6-issue series. All right, there's the comic shop. I'm going to spend 20 minutes in there. I'll set a timer. I'm going to look for this one particular issue. And I went to the shop, and I found it! It was so exciting. It's never happened before in my life, but it happened. And so the book in question was actually Frank Miller's Ronin miniseries.
Wow.
I was looking for issue 2 because I've been able to pick up the other issues here. And so this came out in 1983. It was his first work at DC. And I liken it to a reference in reverse. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you see the homage, and then you go back to the original. It's like, oh, wait, that's where that came from. And there's a giant 2-panel spread of Ronin stabbing through himself to stab the monster on his back. And I'm like, that's from X-Force number 4. And, like, it was so great to see it and to experience it. And the fact that I found issue number 2, and that was the exact issue that I had in my head to find in dollar bins. You never know what you're going to find in dollar bins. Part of the fun is, like, it's like shopping at Aldi for groceries. You don't know what's going to be there, but you just pick up the stuff that's there, and that's what you take. And everybody knows The Dark Knight, and everybody knows Daredevil, but Ronin is a gem that should not be forgotten as much as it is. So cool. That's my pick out of left field.
Very cool. And Lindsay Fahey, what is our cherry on the top this week?
The cherry on top of this week is that I'm going to get Chad Smith a 1-month membership to Costco. He can go see what he can find in that store. If he's
I don't need to find garbage in bulk. That's a terrible idea.
For me, like, I don't know. I'm not a huge comic book fan, but what I do enjoy is I go to Calvin and Hobbes. One of the things that I often enjoy, or I used to enjoy pre-COVID, was going to library book sales, and I've been rescuing old Calvin and Hobbes books from their garbage bins. And they've got all the taped binding to them, and so now I've started introducing my younger sister to them because she very sadly did not know who Calvin and Hobbes was.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. I still think fondly of the first time I saw Spaceman Spiff And I was like, yes, that is not only a great name for any sort of comic book character, but just had a great look to him. And there's so many great things from that Calvin and Hobbes series. And so any particular favorites, favorite characters or concepts from Calvin and Hobbes?
Given the weather, I love the snow goons. Like all those snowmen. That's the time of the year for them.
Hundreds of snowmen in the yard being trampled. I almost pulled out the transmogrifier when we're talking about comic book objects or comic book things. Calvin and Hobbes is the best. That and the Far Side. I can't. They're so wonderful.
Well, that's all the time we had for the Last Comic Shop this week. Make sure that you rate and review and subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss any of our fantastic broadcasts in future. And also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Last Comic Shop so you never miss any of our random musings and thoughts and fanboy praise for all kinds of comic book related topics and pictures. We love pictures. Like if you're an artist, post your stuff. We'll retweet it. It's the best.
Okay, and I was going to mention too, we may be the last comic shop, but chances are there's still a great comic shop in your area. So don't forget to check out the Comic Shop Locator at comicsshoplocator.com and find something near you. You might be able to find some fun stuff for your own to dig out of those dollar bins.
In any case, that's all the time as we said. So until next week, make sure that you stay safe, stay sheltered, don't eat any random planets that might give you gas. Gas giants.
For Asgard!
For Midgard!
For myself?
Exactly. Excelsior.
The Last Comic Shop was a 2021 Black Angus production.